And so we'll get started. So with that, let me just make sure that I can actually manipulate this. Today we're going to talk about the Strategic Response Initiative overall that the Community Foundation, Philanthropy Delaware, the United Way of Delaware, and Dana have worked together to help support nonprofits during this pandemic. A couple of things that we've learned and an overview of how the funds have been deployed, and then we'll move into the vision grant process. Our hope is that we'll do our best to answer the things beforehand, but we definitely are going to leave some time so that if you have questions, you can provide them. And I encourage you to go ahead and use that chat box so that we can capture your questions. We may not get to it in the middle of the presentation, but that way we can review it as we go along. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. First of all, the Strategic Response Initiative. I have to say I'm very proud of our collective work together. I'm sure, as you all know, that this has just been such a difficult time for so many people, and the four organizations really worked well together. We have collectively, I think it's over $4 million now that has been donated out into the community between the United Way's Rapid Response Fund and the Philanthropy Delaware and Delaware Community Foundation's Strategic Response Fund. In addition, part of what has informed that grant making has been your participation in surveys. So we've held 3 flash surveys, and that's also not just helping philanthropy, but we've used that information to help inform our government partners on some of the response that they've been working on. I'm glad Amy's here because I have to give her a shout out. It was really through Amy's leadership that we were able to carve out, I say carve out, but identify $10 million worth of SBA PPP loan funds that could be allocated just for Delaware nonprofits. And so just want to thank her for that, because that was a pretty tremendous way in which nonprofits could more easily access those funds. And Dana helped to provide some of the training and support. It goes over 80 organizations that were able to participate. In addition, we've been holding a variety of different webinars, learning lessons, and now Dana has on its website a recovery and resiliency section that has a lot of tips and tools that you can use to help you as your organization is working on navigating this unprecedented climate. So I wanted to just give you a quick overview of a little bit of more about some of the funds, just kind of help understand what we're doing here. And I'm going to turn it over to Amy so she can talk a little bit about how the Strategic Response Fund has been deployed here in the state.
Sure. So thank you. The Strategic Response Fund was originally designed to help nonprofits respond to, the COVID-19 crisis. And what we realized very quickly was that there was a significant need for, really emergency items, food, housing, things like that. So this pie chart has changed dramatically from March through June. As you can see, a lot of those resources went to human services, housing, other sort of public social benefits for individuals. The process did change recently on the Strategic Response Fund, and so we are kind of shifting back to more of a strategic effort. So you're going to see this continue to change as we move forward. But right now we're really happy with the mix that we have and the diversity of the types of programming that has been funded through this initiative. And it's through the support of all of the participating agencies, but also just an absolute ton of volunteers who are helping us really get into those applications and provide a very thorough review of them. And so, this is truly a collaborative effort that has, I think, tried to reach into all parts of our state.
Yeah, hold on a second. I'm trying to.
Thanks.
There
Yeah.
we go.
There you go. Thanks. I know you said I could drive, but I'm not sure how. So as you can see from a location perspective, this really captures where the organizations are based. And so, while it shows 54% in Wilmington, we do have a lot of statewide agencies that are based out of the community services building and other places in the Wilmington area. So we really did take a strong lens of trying to make sure that we have strong geographic representation from the grants that have been funded through date or to date. And we're pretty pleased with that. You can see, a large percentage in Sussex County, some Kent County, statewide and other. We do have some agencies that, may be in Maryland or Pennsylvania, but they're providing direct services in Delaware, really quality ones. We're really happy, as I mentioned before, not just with the diversity of types of programs that were funded, but also the location diversity as well.
And I would just like to add also that I've been very impressed with the reviewers and the council members who were very intentional to ensure that very small and volunteer-based organizations that are doing really important work were included and considered. I know there's sometimes concern that they may not have a fair shot, but in this case, they have, and there's been some wonderful grassroots organizations that have benefited from these funds. Sorry, I'm letting people in as I'm talking. So there are two types of grant programs now with the Philanthropy Delaware Community Foundation Fund, what we call the Strategic Response Fund. The first one is, as Amy mentioned, is an evolution of the original grant program, and it's called the Community Needs Grant. It is a monthly grant program, and it is moving a little bit more into funding and helping organizations sustain their programs, or in a lot of cases pivot their organizations. And there's a maximum grant value of $50,000. What has been added, and the first round completed, actually I think it was last week was the first round, or maybe 2 weeks ago, is called the Vision Grant Program. And this is a little bit different, and that's why we have this webinar today, to try to help you understand what this is. Where the Community Needs Grant is tended to be focused on a individual nonprofit, the Vision Grant is more about focusing on systems and systemic issues and opportunities that the pandemic has brought forward. And so you're going to see a little bit of a different way in which this fund is set up, because it allows you actually to access it at multiple points in the process. But it is also, again, a little bit more about systemic opportunities for change and positive impact. And therefore, there's a heavy leaning towards organizations that come in as collaboratives than a single entity coming in that believes that they can affect the change, by themselves. So I just wanted to put that out there, because I think we saw in some of the earlier submissions, there were some single entities that were trying to submit, and those, it'll probably be harder to get in as a single entity. This is really designed for that collaborative process. On the Vision Grant Council, you have Stuart Comstock-Gay. And so the council kind of serves almost like a combination of a governing body, but also they ultimately select the organizations or the collaboratives that will be moving forward in the process. And again, very intentional about having representation from the nonprofit sector, as well as from some of the key foundations that have invested in the COVID-19 response initiative. And I'm kind of I get to be a behind the scenes. If somebody has a question, I help out. So Dana still is available to provide advice as necessary.
Yeah, and I would just add, if we talk about that, we also have a pretty strong geographic representation on that council as well. And it is a distinct council that is separate from the community needs grants as well.
Right, thank you, Amy, for that. So the Vision Grant Program has three outcomes for its funding. One is to be able to help support new solutions that have arose. And I should say, I should cap all of this. that these have to be issues that have either emerged or were exacerbated by the COVID-19. The dollars that were donated to this fund are specifically around that. So even though there may be lots of opportunities to improve systems, it's important that the collaboratives look at how COVID-19 has influenced or is impacting things that are happening in your communities. So it's designed to help with those solutions, recognizing that sometimes when organizations come together, they can really actually have a greater impact. And taking it even one step further, there may be opportunities where organizations realize that that maybe beyond a strategic partnership, that actually consolidating, they could be stronger and be more efficient and have an impact. So recognizing that the kinds of opportunities that come forward could be in a variety of different ways, but all of them are really very much about outcome-based activities, not so much about sustaining an organization. Amy, are you covering this one or am I? I'm sorry. I think I'm covering this one.
Yeah, you are.
So, and so I should say that I had the pleasure of working on creating this with Cynthia Pritchard and Stu Comstock-Gay, which is kind of why I'm doing some of the background. Amy has recently joined the cause. So as I mentioned, the grant criteria is very much outcomes oriented, solutions based. It's related to COVID-19. Because we recognize that it is a collaborative, there is an interest, especially in some of the phases that are looking for more significant funding, that there's confirmation that the boards of directors are supporting this collaborative, so that we're not in a situation where 3 executives get together, think it's a good idea, and then 2 of them a year from now transition and the collaborative falls together. So they're looking for not just quick fixes, but really sustainable systemic change opportunities. There does need to be a lead organization. That would be the organization that would receive the funds, and they would serve as the kind of the key liaison for the collaborative. Clarity around who's doing what. Again, that's assigned to the council, that the group has been working together, has really thought through what this could look like, and knows who's going to play a role. Also understanding the landscape. Because systems change is not something you can just pop in and do overnight. There's important to recognize that the organizations that are coming together really know what's going on, are well connected, and have the potential to really make the impact that they desire. And then you're going to find that there's actually a couple of different ways in which you access the fund. And there is one phase is actually implementing it all the way. And it starts with, and I should say, I don't want to jump into Amy's area, but there is a portion of the grant that you can use to actually help you implement your initiative. And in that case, what the council would be looking at is how do you fund it beyond the initial investment to get you started. So they're also looking for those, again, those sustaining opportunities. I'll send it over to you, Amy. Do a better job talking about this.
Okay, great. So there are 3 actual aspects of this vision grant process, and the council will look at it and your project based on 3 different areas that are really kind of areas of readiness. So if we look at this table, there's a lot of information there, but we're really going to look at it from a column by column basis. So if you are in the discovery phase, you're an organization that has a big idea. You see some systems change that you think needs to take place, and you think you're the right person or the right agency to do it. You have some partners in mind, but maybe you haven't fully fleshed out, what each of the partners is going to do. You think that, the project, or maybe you have some assumptions about the environment or the landscape. And so you maybe need a little bit of help defining that. And so the support that's available is really to spend some consulting time looking into that idea and saying, is your hypothesis correct? Do you have the right partners at the table? Do we know what each of the partners is going to do? And perhaps you might determine through this process that either the scope is too big for what you can manage, or that the scope isn't large enough, and maybe you need to reconsider, how you're structuring it. So the expected outcome and goal of the discovery phase is a 2 to 3 page just scope of work, help you really define what it is that you're trying to do and really kind of chart a path forward. And so the value of that grant we have is up to $5,000, and that's really for the facilitation and consulting costs, right? So that isn't dollars that goes directly to your organization, but rather it goes to Dana to help support the consulting services that are required from, from that activity. And one of the things that of the Vision Council and, this grant in particular is that the value really comes from determining and helping you determine the value proposition for what you're doing. It's not designed to get you from, point A of idea all the way through to implementation and first year of funding. The design is to really make sure that you have an opportunity to think through the system change that you're hoping to make, think through your partners and what each of their roles are going to be, and help you get to that next step. And then I'll go to the next column, which is our planning phase. And this is an organization or a group of organizations that have already developed their idea. They've already examined the landscape. They know who their partners are. Perhaps they don't have MOUs with their partners yet. They really need to really define kind of really precisely who's doing what. Maybe they need some outside consulting services from a national organization or somebody who has, really in-depth knowledge of a particular topic. Maybe they need to look at, how government could play a role. And so they've got some, additional work that needs to happen there. And this is also designed to be consulting services. So funds of up to $25,000 will pay for a consultant, and whether that is, after you go through the Dana process, you may determine that Dana is the appropriate consultant for you. Or maybe you are, working in a particular area and there is a regional or a national consultant that you'd like to bring in to really examine this with you. And this is an opportunity to get funds to do that. So in this case, at the end of the process, if you are awarded a planning grant, the Vision Council would ask you to go out, identify your consultant, get a scope of work, get the, the bids and everything that you need to understand what the cost of that is going to be. And then once you have that in hand, the funds will go to you to engage that consultant based on the cost of that consultant. And so you have up to $25,000 in consulting services that can be covered as a portion of this. And one of the things that I just want to reiterate as it relates to value is when you're doing systems change work, all of these costs, $5,000 or $25,000 or costs that or dollars that some of the nonprofits don't just have sitting around for planning, right? Or sitting around for consulting services. And, it could be that, you don't ultimately do it. Maybe the consultant comes back and says, hey, this isn't the right time to do it, or, you need to do all these other things first. But at least you're able to make that investment where otherwise you may not be able to, just based on, kind of today's environment and, people being just really concerned about what available dollars they have and how they're using them. So the third one is implementation. And so this is an organization who has gone through all this planning work. Maybe you had a feasibility study already completed, or maybe it's just things are rolling so quickly because of COVID that you have already very quickly put together MOUs with partners. You've already engaged the state if it is a, a project that interacts with the state, and you are just, ready to kind of go down the path, and it's moving so fast that, you really are ready for that stage. And perhaps you're an organization that goes through all three of these steps to actually get to the implementation stage. So that's possible as well. And so funding for this is really designed to be up to $50,000. We have in here the larger of 10% or $50,000, but that 10% might actually change a little bit, we'll see. But again, while this is $50,000 and the community needs is also $50,000, we didn't want you to think, well, why would I go this route? And the value of this route is really to help you get to full implementation. And it will also help you get to other funders who have an opportunity to look at this with you. So the next step after you complete implementation is to go in front of a funders panel. And so we, as a Vision Council, along with Philanthropy Delaware, will set that up where we will have a number of state funders in the room who are ready to hear from you. And they're going to answer some very simple questions. Are we interested in the project? How much money do we think we can commit? How much, what is the process for that? And will funding of this particular project impact any of your additional funding that you may receive from our organization, either this year or next year? And so you'll get that feedback right away. And so that's the added value after you receive the implementation.
Whoops, wrong way.
Okay, so we tried to put this together in a nice, neat chart, but there's a lot of lines, so I apologize for that. And so you can see, you really have two entry points, okay? So you've reached, actually, the first milestone is attending this webinar, so thank you for being here today. And so you can do two things to get started in this process. So one of the options is just to go straight for the letter of intent. You know what you want to do, you know what phase you're in, or you think you know what phase you're in. And so you want to just go ahead and submit a letter of intent and get started. The other option is to contact Dana right away and say, I have an idea, and maybe I think I know what phase I'd like to be in, but I'd like some feedback on that. Or, could you help me develop my idea so that we can create, a really well thought out letter of intent? So you can really do that, that starting point on either side. So straight to LOI or straight to Dana and then to the letter of intent. Once you submit the letter of intent, the Vision Council will review that and we'll give you two options. So the first one is, we really like what we see. We'd love to see you flesh it out more. And so we'll ask you for a full proposal. We also might look at it and say, we don't think it's COVID related, or, maybe we're not quite sure. There's still too many questions. There's a number of reasons why we might say, we don't think it's ready for a full proposal, or maybe it just doesn't meet the guidelines of the program. You would then have the option to either work with Dana to create your full proposal or to go straight into the proposal. And so ideally, if you're in the discovery phase, we'd like you to work with Dana on that. And if you are in research and planning, go ahead and submit that. And then implementation is the same way. And the idea is that if you're at that discovery phase, you can come back multiple times. So you may be awarded, that contracting support for discovery, and then after you do the work, you might come back for research and planning and get the larger contracting services, or larger contracting dollars available to you. And then once you complete that, if you deem that the project is ready to go, it's ready to be implemented, then you can come back again for the implementation as well. And once you get through to implementation, then you'll have the option to go to the Vision Funder panel. That's if you are awarded at the implementation level. Sheila, did I miss anything? Or?
Yeah, no, I think you did a great job. And I would say that in the research and planning phase, you may find that some of the funding you might need could be, for example, legal support. So depending on what the project is, the funds could be used for a variety of either consultative or technical assistance support.
Yeah, accounting would be another example too, because sometimes, if you are proposing something that's more on the, say, the for-profit side, and how does that interact with your nonprofit or something to that effect.
Right. Amy, there's a question that I'm going to go ahead and ask because I think you might be able to answer it. How will this process affect, if at all, the ability of the nonprofits to solicit grants from the funders who are on the review panel, which could be related to the big idea premise?
Yeah, so that is an excellent question, and one that we have thought through because, the worst thing that could happen is that you come to the funder panel and you ask for dollars, and they give you dollars for your big idea. And then when you ask them for your annual operating support, they say, well, we already gave you money, right? So obviously that is a concern. So one of the questions that we're asking very clearly of the funders is, if you are interested in supporting this, how does that impact your ongoing relationship with this particular nonprofit? Is it going to impact additional funding that's coming out this year or next year? And in the case of the foundations, we're asking very clearly, if you come in for funding from one of these members through the Vision Council process, do you have to wait 2 years to apply again? Or if you're already in that 2-year window, like how does that impact? And it's really going to be on a case-by-case basis. And what you're going to receive as far as feedback from the funder panel is, you know, yes, we're interested. These are the implications or the potential impacts. This is how you would have to apply, because in many instances, you're not going to get a, yes, we want to put $25,000 into that. Tell us how to wire the money. There's still going to be some sort of process that you're going to have to go through with each of those funders to apply, just to make sure that you are meeting their guidelines and they can keep, you know, complete files at their organization as well. So you're going to get that feedback up front with all of those questions answered, and then it'll be up to you, you know, whether you think it is, you know, appropriate to go in for this particular project, or if there is a potential for impact of your operating grant, to wait and go for the operating. But at least we're trying very hard to try to get you that information up front so that you can make the most informed decision possible.
So Amy, along those same lines, do you recommend that if nonprofits have partnerships with certain funders or those who might be on the panel, that they speak with those funders in addition to the Vision Grant, or should they wait until they go through the Vision Grant process before they have their first conversation?
Yeah, I think it's, you know, I would say it's on a case by case basis. You know, if you have a really strong relationship with a particular funder, you know, keeping those lines of communication open and having more dialogue is always a really positive thing. And so, you know, contacting them in advance is always a good idea. Or, you know, if you see them, you know, right now we're doing these all virtually, right? So, you know, when we do the panel, everybody is right in front of you, which is great. So you have a really quick opportunity to follow up with them immediately after the panel and say, you know, hey, I saw you on the panel. Can you give me some feedback? What are you thinking? Do you think there's any potential for this, or should we wait? And, you know, most of us are really open to the idea of just giving you that really honest feedback, because, you know, ultimately we just want you to be successful in everything that you do.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
We have a couple of examples that we wanted to share with you because we thought that might help understand a little bit more about what some examples of what qualifies. So Amy, you want to take through the first two and I'll cover the third one?
Sure. So the first one that we wanted to make sure we had this as an example that we helped from an implementation perspective was an online summer school program. And we deem this to be implementation ready. And the importance of this and the distinction of this is that it was a platform that a number of providers could utilize to, you know, really get their online, you know, summer school programs off the ground and moving. And so rather than each of the different providers needing to get their own software, their own Zoom licenses, you know, their own scheduling, it was a great way for families to really look at a whole menu of services that were available to them. And then cue into each one of those that they thought was appropriate for their child. And so it was a really great collaborative process. It was very, you know, kind of tech framework specific, but it solved a lot of problems, not just for the service providers, but for the families that were taking advantage of those opportunities as well. And the reason that we really wanted to talk about this one was because we wanted to make a strong distinction between a pivot and a strategic change, right? So a pivot might be one organization approaching us for a summer school program and saying, I want to take this program online, right? And so now I'm going to offer it virtually. And that's important because, you know, from a nonprofit perspective, you still have to provide your services, right? But is it truly a systems change opportunity? Is it truly visionary to just do it independently versus, you know, this strong collaboration and the strong kind of sharing of a technological resource? And so that's why we thought it was visionary. And again, this is one of those ones that went straight to implementation because, as I mentioned earlier, you know, there are some things that, you know, just the ball starts rolling and the partners start aligning, and you know, everybody sees this vision. And you know, from a timing perspective, you know, summer school, you know, we're almost at regular school now, so they were ready to go. Closing the digital divide, this is a more challenging one. This is, how do we get people access to, we have all these virtual programs, but if you don't have access to Wi-Fi, like how do you get kids to actually be able to access those programs? And this is one that, it just requires, a lot of technical knowledge, a lot of geographical knowledge, but it's super critical, not just for after school programs, but for our school programs as well. And so this one was really in the planning phase. And it gives an opportunity for a multitude of agencies and organizations and schools to kind of connect in around one challenge, and how do we solve this big challenge that all of us are experiencing. And Sheila, I'm going to let you talk about homelessness. Go ahead.
Sure. I can talk about it. I was actually part of the process, so I got to experience it firsthand. So here's an example where the organizations submitted through the LOI, the letter of interest, and when it came to the council, it just didn't feel like they had really explored what was the initiative going to be. It didn't seem as focused, and there were just a lot of questions. So the council sent that to Dana, and we very quickly, our process was to really help them explore. And I say them, it was probably about 15 people, 15 organizations, including government offices, as well as nonprofits and churches. And so really starting to get deep into what are the problems that are happening because of COVID, which populations, because in homelessness, there are many different reasons that people are homeless, and there's also different population segments, such as families, veterans, those who are suffering from mental illness. So really starting to get a sense of where they felt that if they put a collective effort together, they could really move the needle in reducing homelessness, because that then drove what type of expertise they would need to bring in to help them craft the program. And so within a few weeks, we worked with them, we conducted research, we had a lot of stakeholder interviews. We also interviewed several different national support organizations that really focus on homelessness. And we even researched other cities that had addressed and reduced homelessness. And from there, the group focused in on a specific population. They're working on reducing homelessness for families because, again, of the trauma that children feel, and also recognizing that because of COVID-19, we may start to see a much higher incidence of families being evicted. So they wanted to get ahead of the curve. And so they came back in then for a planning grant. And so they have received that planning grant, and they're using those funds to tap that national expert to work with them on really shaping their strategies and the detailed plans around reducing homelessness for families. So this particular organization got some funds to help them really go through their big idea, tighten it up, and then they came back again and were able to get some funding to help them with that homelessness expert.
And I think what I really like about this project, and I like about the story as it worked through the process, is that, at the discovery phase, they were thinking that they may use a completely different model than what they ultimately decided after all those stakeholder interviews and the work that Dana did. So they did have a shift in their hypothesis of, the group of individuals that they really wanted to serve, but also the type of model that they thought ultimately they would want to pursue. So, that's the value.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. Some other types of examples that could come forward. For example, you could have strategic partnerships where there's multiple organizations that by coming together, they can increase their impact. Again, thinking about innovation. And I think one thing to keep in mind, Amy mentioned partnerships with government. There could also be partnerships with businesses. So there could be a solution that's brought forward that includes government, business, and nonprofits. Improving access for a population, such as the Digital Divide Initiative, and certainly initiatives that could help to address the racial equity, social justice concerns that have been raised because of the pandemic. Amy, you want to speak to the timeline where we are on this?
Sure. So we are already in August, and so we are starting round 2 of the process. And so the first letter of intent, or the next letter of intent, is scheduled for August 21st. We're going to be reaching back out to agencies that submitted the letters of intent to let them know whether or not we are going to be pursuing a full application on September 3rd. And then you will have until the 17th to complete a full application. That gives us time to review those and make decisions, and then have a full panel too. So the panel there, October 8th, that is for the funders panel for those agencies or agencies that are awarded implementation grants, so that they can present those. And so, what you'll notice here, we've talked about the 3 different processes, right? Discovery, planning, implementation. If you come into round 2 for discovery, and then you get to round 3 for planning, right? You might ask yourself, well, what about implementation? I might not get there. And honestly, that's okay, because there's value in the first 2, right? Knowing that you have now buttoned up your entire process gives you an opportunity to approach your existing funders as well as new funders with the information that you have gleaned in the program that you have developed. So we do think that there's still value just starting at the very beginning, even if you don't think that you're coming in for planning this time, and so you won't get to implementation in time for round 3. I'd also say, obviously things continue to evolve. We know that, as we've gone through this process, that, we've been making changes along the way, and we know that's not always comfortable. It's not comfortable for us always, and we sure know that it's not always comfortable for the nonprofits. We try to refine this as we go along, and we're also trying to work within the confines of the dollars that are available. So I would say, that these are our current plans, and particularly as it relates to the timing, we think there's value to all 3 aspects, or all 3 columns, or areas: discovery, planning, and implementation. And so, there's a number of opportunities here for you to come in along that pipeline.
So we tried to come up with a couple of questions that we thought you might have, and I'll let Amy answer them, and then I'll jump in if necessary.
Yeah. So first, how do we get help firming up our big idea? So there's two things that I would suggest to you. One, if you need help from Dana, give Sheila a call. Give her a group a call. They're there and happy to help you. And it's a great resource. And the agencies that have taken advantage of that, I think, have benefited from that opportunity. The other, if you want to just give us a call, we've got Melissa Mychek from Philanthropy Delaware. We've got her information at the end of the slide. So if you just want, a single individual, just kind of talk through, feel free to give her a call as well. Sheila, anything to add on that one?
No, and what I'll do is we're going to send this PowerPoint out to you, so we'll include Melissa's contact information in there, so that way if you can't reach me, or pretty much, we're working in partnership the best that we can, so we should both have similar answers if you when you reach us.
Agreed. So if you have a big idea and you need help figuring out if it will work, that is this process, trying to help you get, those answers of, will my big idea work? Do I have the right people at the table? And so that's part of this process. You can come, go to Dana, and they will help you try to determine those things in advance, or you can submit a letter of intent and let us know what you think the challenges are. What are you going to have to work on, if you receive funding? And that's, the whole goal of this is to help you get to that next stage. And so being open about, what you need to work on is actually really helpful. How do you need help? So what if we have an idea, have a plan, but need seed funding to get it off the ground? So I would ask myself a number of questions before I came in, directly to implementation. So, are my partners aligned? Are we all in the same place? Do we all agree? One of the things we're going to be asking you for, in the full proposal, is a letter from each of the different agencies letting us know that they're on board with your partnership. And part of that is making sure that those letters reflect what each of the agencies is going to do, right? So making sure that you know that, your idea and all of your partners, they're all fleshed out, is going to be really important before you come in directly to implementation. But if that seed money is just to help firm up those details, again, then I would consider, discovery or planning, depending on, what type of work and what level you think you're at. So the investor panel, we actually have one this afternoon, which is great. It's really modeled off of Philanthropy Delaware's large campaign panel. And so that panel brings together multiple funders. This afternoon, we have over 20 funders who are coming together. The agency will pitch for 15 minutes a slide deck that describes the project budget, what they think the cash flow of this particular project is going to look like over the next 5 years. So not just what does it cost to implement over the next year, but how are we going to sustain it in the future if it is a project that requires sustaining, correct? And so they'll have 15 minutes to present, they'll have 45 minutes of questions and answers, and then each of the panelists is going to be given a worksheet that they're going to be asked those questions I mentioned earlier. Do you want to fund this? Right? Do you have any additional questions that you think might be that you might, want to have the answer to before you make this decision? Is this going to impact any additional funding that this organization may receive from you now or in the future? What is the process for this organization to ask you for funding for implementation of this project? And then you will have that back within, I think it's 2 weeks of this is the longest turnaround. Ideally, you'll have it back much sooner. In a virtual world, it's a lot harder. Typically, we would ask them to do it the same day if we have them in the room. But being virtual, it takes us just a touch longer. But you would get really quality feedback, and then you would have an opportunity, and you would have the name of that organization saying what their interest is, and then you can approach that very directly. So what if you believe that resource sharing or a merger is the big idea? I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think those are great things. I think the question is really, is that merger going to help you as an organization just save money, right? Are you going to be providing the same level of services, or is it truly visionary that together as a combined organization, we're going to be able to do more in the community. We're going to be able to reach deeper. We're going to be able to, by sharing our resources or, sharing, something, we're going to come out of this exponentially stronger, or be able to make a much larger impact on the community. And so that's, I think if you're approaching it from that perspective, it needs to be more than we can sustain what we're doing more cost effectively, and it needs to be, we're going to be doing something truly visionary by doing this together. And maybe they're two wholly different, types of organizations that can then impact a family more holistically by being able to provide two different services, but are complementary. And in doing so, there's going to be that greater impact on the community.
Yeah, and I just want to reiterate that this grant is not to sustain organizations. And so if that is what you think you need, that's what the community needs grant is available for. That has a completely different process. This is really about how community impact can be greater because of these initiatives.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. And then the lead organization is going to be the organization that is submitting these applications, right? They are going to also be the agency that ultimately submits, any sort of consulting plans. They're going to manage the financial aspect of it if any dollars are coming there. Ideally, they're the organization that will present to the large campaign panel. And so that's why it's really important to know kind of who's doing what in advance, because if someone presenting behalf of your organization or your collaborative to the large campaign panel, they need to be fully on board that they're going to be responsible for those dollars that come in. And then you, as a potential partner organization of that lead, need to be very comfortable in understanding what portion of those dollars support the services that you are providing to the collaborative as well. So making sure that all of those relationships are, you know, really firmed up is going to be very important.
So the next steps are really to, if you have questions or want to have a sounding board to see if your idea could work, give us a call at Dana, and you all probably have my email address, but if not, you'll have it because I'll send you out this presentation when we're done. The dates for the letter of intent are here, but also if you go to the Delaware Community Foundation's website, they do have the dates. They also have a sample of the letter of intent application, as well as a sample of the request for investment application that you can look at before you begin the application process. The other thing to keep in mind is that Philanthropy Delaware and the Community Foundation are requesting that any organizations that apply for the Vision Grant have seen this webinar. So we put a code here at the back end. So if they do ask you for the code, you can use this. As I said, this also, we will put the recording. It'll be on the Community Foundation's website as well as Dana's website, and it might even be on Philanthropy Delaware's website as well. So it's available in a lot of places, so that if you do need to go back and reference or not quite sure about something, you have the webinar. But certainly, again, you can give Melissa at Philanthropy Delaware or me a call, and we're happy to help answer questions the best that we can. So with that, I'm going to stop share and just see if there are questions from those who are here in the group. All right, I don't see anybody raising their hand or... Great. Well then, Amy, I think that's a wrap. If no one else has questions. We hope that this was helpful for you all. And again, please feel free to reach out if something comes to mind later today or whenever you begin exploring this process. Thank you, everybody, for your time today, and have a great day.
Thank you.